Ross mentions in 29.2 that there is a problem with metathesis and assimilation in the Hithpael. We have some problems here for forming the Hithpael stem, and in some grammars it will refer to stems as binyan. So I put that in here just so that you might know another word for this. So a stem or a binyan are interchangeable. In particular, the process of metathesis and assimilation can affect the underlying form of a verb in the Hithpael, and the result is going to be that the surface form of the verb looks different from what you're expecting. So what I want to do is I'll explain the processes in English and then show you how these processes work their way into the Hebrew verbal system. Let's talk about metathesis. If you've studied Greek or other languages, you may have come across this word before, but I think it's the first time we've seen it here. Metathesis occurs when two sounds, or consonants in this case, switch places, and it's often due to factors involving articulatory phonetics, how you articulate sounds in a language. Note, for example, that we have examples of audible metathesis in English even if our spelling doesn't reflect the metathesis. Take this word for a very famous quarterback. Brett, what? How do you pronounce this? Favre. Brett Favre. Now, that name is actually a French word, and they would pronounce it in France as Favre. Favre. Okay? We are nasty old Americans who don't follow anybody's pronunciation rules, and we metathesize the V and the R sound, and we switch them. We put that R before the V. Why? Because it's a lot easier for us to do it. And in America, whatever is convenient, we do, right? So, Brett Favre. My kids and our kids do metathesis all the time. One of my sons, instead of saying camera, would say cramya. He would switch sounds. Instead of Joseph, Jophus. Here, he switched the PH and the S sound. Okay? One of my fellow professors at the university, his son could never say New York. He always said U-Nork. U-Nork. He would metathesize these sounds. So we know the process of metathesis. We just haven't seen it in Hebrew yet, but I think you understand the concept here. Let's look at this other sound change issue that can happen in English as well as in other languages that's also going to affect how the Hithpael stem is formed in Hebrew. We have this process called assimilation, which is not anything new to you. You already remember this from discussing the preposition min and what happens to that noon when it butts up against another consonant. Remember, assimilation occurs when the sound of one consonant causes the consonant beside it to change its sound to be like the other consonant. And I refer to this on prior occasions as the Borg problem. The Borg problem, remember, is from Star Trek. The Borg would assimilate everything. They would say, the resistance is futile, you will be assimilated. And there are really two major types of assimilation that can happen in Hebrew. We could have full assimilation, and we could have partial assimilation. So let's talk about each of these real quickly. Full assimilation occurs when the first consonant, so I'm calling that C1, the first consonant becomes identical to consonant number 2. Take an example like this. We have the word immobile, and in the prefix of immobile, what we actually have is the word mobile, which means able to move, and we're prefixing the prefix in, which means not mobile. But you'll notice that when we do this, the N of in assimilates to the M of the consonant that it's next to, and so it becomes immobile. So we have full assimilation of the N to the M next to it. Think inimitable. If something is imitable, you can imitate it. In negates that, not able to be imitated. So the real negative is in, not im. That im is a result of assimilation, full assimilation. Now, partial assimilation happens when the first consonant becomes like the second consonant, but not identical to it. So it becomes similar in things like voicing, which has to do with vocal cord vibration, the location of its formation, where it's articulated, or perhaps an emphatic character, which we don't have in English, but we'll see this in Hebrew, where an emphatic consonant has constriction in the throat, and when another consonant gets close to it, it could cause partial assimilation, could cause the other consonant to also become emphatic or to constrict the throat as well. Now, take a look at this example here. We have the Z sound, and in English, we will add the Z sound. It's not necessarily the letter Z, but the sound Z to the end of a verb to indicate its third person singular when it's present tense. So take the word to lag, and if I want to say that somebody is doing this verb, I will add a Z sound. In English, we'll write an S, but it still is a Z sound. Lags. He lags. You hear that Z sound, okay? Z is a voiced sound, which is to say that the vocal cords vibrate when you pronounce it. Now, what happens if I want to use the third person singular form in English? Normally I would add a Z sound, but what if I need to add the Z sound to a word that actually ends with an unvoiced consonant, and that is the K sound? I can't say lack z. He lack z this. What happens is that the Z sound is forced to partially assimilate to the K sound because the K is unvoiced. There's no vocal cord vibration, and so the Z devoices in partial assimilation so that I get an S sound. Basically, an S is a Z that is unvoiced. So lack z becomes lacks. He lacks any sense. Okay? So this is partial assimilation. The D sound is added to the end of a verb to make it past in English. So think peg, and in the past tense, I'm going to add the D sound. Pegged. He pegged this. Okay? Now, if I have to add a D to a voiceless consonant, like a K sound, that D partially assimilates and becomes a voiceless D, which is also known as a T. T and D are the same sound, except the D is voiced and the T is unvoiced. And since the K is unvoiced, I am going to make my D unvoiced as well. So peg, add the D, pegged, peck, add the D, and I don't get pecked, but pecked. Pecked. The D partially assimilates to the T sound by unvoicing or devoicing. Now, we have other phenomena where both metathesis and assimilation can happen at the same time, and this is an interesting phenomenon. My kids perform double operations like this on some of their words, employing both metathesis and assimilation at the same time. For example, take the word that used to come out of my son's mouth, spacketball. And he would try to say basketball. He was a big basketball fan, but he would say spacketball instead. So what happened here? Well, there was metathesis going on. We have spacketball, okay, spacketball, and then assimilation. This the B and the S were reversed, and then because the B followed the S is unvoiced, and so the B devoiced, and it became spacketball. Paschetti. This is another one. Maybe you've heard this one in your family. From spaghetti, we have metathesis of the S and P sounds, switching positions, and then the vowel comes in between. Pasgetti, and then because the S is unvoiced, the voiced G sound devoices and becomes a K sound. Paschetti becomes paschetti. Paschetti. And then jemamas. One of my sons used to mix up his letters and sounds, and instead of saying piglet, he would say pliget, and he couldn't say hobby lobby, he would say globby globby, and then he would say jemamas instead of pajamas. And so we used to say, hey Andrew, say Piglet went to Hobby Lobby in his pajamas, and he would say Pliget went to Globby Globby in his jemamas. And then we would all laugh and make fun of him mercilessly. Anyhow, he's outgrown that, and we've quit teasing him for it. But what happened with jemamas? for pajamas? Well, we had metathesis, japamas, okay, pajama, japama, the J and P switched places, and then assimilation, where the P fully assimilates to the M that it's near. So jamamas, jamamas. That was easier for Andrew to say. Okay, so that's metathesis plus assimilation at the same time. And now on to the Hithpael. What is going on in the Hithpael? What happens is that we're going to see consonant changes involved in the Hithpael, and these consonant changes are due to the tav of the hith prefix that's going to be butting up against a root 1 consonant from the verbal root. And that root 1 consonant will either be a dental consonant or a sibilant. Remember, sibilants are those consonants that hiss. Your samic and sin and shin. And where are these formed? They're formed close to the dental area. Say s, sh, s, right? For sin, shin, and samic. These are going to involve the tongue coming up right behind the teeth. Now, why is this a problem? Because both the root 1 consonant of a verb that has a dental or a sibilant and the tav of the hith prefix are homorganic. They're formed in the same area. And there are going to be some changes that occur here when these two types of consonants come together. Now, the first thing that could happen is we could have metathesis, but no assimilation at all. And when will this occur? I'm laying it out this way, by the way, because I think Ross is rather confusing in the way he describes these things, and I want to try to give you a more systematic approach. So, first of all, you could have metathesis and no assimilation. This happens when, first of all, you've got a prefix dental tav from the hith prefix butting up against an unvoiced root 1 sibilant. Sin, samic, shin. All right? So when you have that situation, you're going to have metathesis where the tav of the hith prefix and the root 1 consonant are going to switch places. Let's take an example here for our A example. I have hith, sh. Okay? Hith, sh. I've got the tav next to a sibilant. What will happen here? These will switch places, and so I get hishta, hishta. Now, think about that. It's a lot easier to pronounce hishta than to pronounce hithsha, hithsha, hishta, hishta. Okay? So take a verb like shamar in the Hithpael, to take heed to oneself. It should be hithshamer, and it becomes hishtamer, hishtamer. Hithshamer becomes hishtamer. The metathesis has occurred. Now, when you're parsing, this is where you've got to be really careful. You might think that roots 1, 2, and 3 are those. Tav, mem, resh, because the 3 root letters have always been side by side. But that's not the case here. Because of the metathesis, root 1 is actually missing. Well, it's not really missing, but it's in the wrong place. It actually is right there. Hishtamer. So my root letters are shamar, not tamar. Okay? Now here's another example with the samic. I have a hissa, and with metathesis it becomes hista, hista. So sabal, in the Hithpael, to become burdensome, would be hithsabel, hithsabel, and when we metathesize, it becomes histabel, histabel. It's easier to pronounce that. So that's metathesis and no assimilation. Secondly, I could have metathesis and partial assimilation. Okay, some assimilation, but not full assimilation. This occurs because I have the Hithpael's hith prefix has a dental tav, and it's coming up next to, in root 1 position, a voiced or emphatic root 1 sibilant. Zion is the voiced version of the root 1 sibilant. Z, z. Okay, vocal cord vibration, that's what voicing is. And emphatic is the tsadi. Now, we have transliterated the tsadi as this, and we pronounce it as this in our standard pronunciation, but actually, it's an S sound with constriction in the throat at the same time. Sa, sa. which is actually difficult for us to pronounce, so we just do this. Okay, but my point here is that the sadi is an emphatic S. And so when this happens, when I have one of these two in root 1 position, the zayin or the sadi, the tav and the sadi are going to trade places. So hithsa are going to trade places. It's going to become hitsta. But then this tav right here is going to partially assimilate and become emphatic. That is to say, a tav, okay, this is a T that is not emphatic, and it will become a tate, which is a T with a dot under it, which is the sign that makes it an emphatic. An emphatic T would have been a T with constriction in the throat. Ta, ta. Okay, so hitsa becomes hitsta becomes hitsta with an emphatic tate there. Okay, so the verb tzadek, to be righteous or just, and a Hithpael is to justify oneself. You see the way it should be is hith tzadek. Then with metathesis, these switch places, hits tzadek, and then with partial assimilation, hits tzadek with the tate instead of a tav. Okay, so here you don't really see root 1 at all because of the assimilation. It's become a tate, but the root letters really are this. Okay. The final thing that can happen is we could have, thirdly, no metathesis at all, but full assimilation of the root 1 consonant of the verb. Okay, so here we're going to have a situation again where we have this prefix dental tav from the hith prefix, and then any root 1 that is a dental consonant. What is a dental consonant? A dental consonant is a consonant that is formed by the teeth in some way. Nun, tate, dalet, tav. Think about how you pronounce all of these consonants, and all of them, the tongue comes and makes contact with the back of the teeth. Th or t, d, t, n. Even the nun is a dental nasal. All right? So when we have this type of a situation, we might not have metathesis, but we will get full assimilation. So here I have hith, t with the emphatic T, and it can become hit, t, where this tav here has assimilated and become the emphatic T as well. Okay? Now once that happens, I'm closing a syllable with the tate, opening a syllable with the tate. Hebrew doesn't like to write the same consonant twice when it can just write it once and put a dagesh forte there. So you'll have a dagesh forte and one occurrence. So taher is to be pure or clean. The Hithpael of taher is to purify oneself. And so the process is hit taher, then hit taher with the tate from the tav, and then written once hit taher with the dagesh forte. And then the verb nava in the Hithpael is to prophesy. So I've got a root 1 nun, which is a dental, just as the tate was. And then hithna becomes hinna. Okay, so the tav becomes a nun, fully assimilates to that following nun, and then the nun is written once with a dagesh forte. So hithnabe, hinnabe, and then written once with a dagesh. Hinabe. So there you go. He prophesied. So that's assimilation. A little bit further down on your sheet, what I've given you are the consonants that can affect this issue of metathesis or assimilation. So when I have dental consonants, they could be tav or dalet. These can take dagesh lene because they are begat gefat letters. Tate or nun. This could undergo the problem with number three category of phonetic changes. Sibilants are of these sorts. Okay, so we have unvoiced dentals and sibilants, voiced dentals and sibilants, emphatic dentals and emphatic sibilants, and then there are no sibilants that are nasal, but we do have a dental nasal. Okay, so these will do the metathesis route and partial assimilation here with these two. The dentals will not metathesize, but they will do the full assimilation. Now, the last thing we need to do here is just talk about how we translate the Hithpael. And the Hithpael has several nuances. These are the four main ones that we will see. Again, in order to know exactly what a verb would mean in its Hithpael stem, you need to look at the lexicon. Look at your lexical entry, and that will help you to be sure. First of all, we have the directly reflexive sense of the Hithpael. Here, when a Hithpael is directly reflexive, then the subject that performs the Hithpael verb acts directly on himself or herself. All right, so take a verb like kadash, and the PL, kadesh, means he sanctified someone. Okay, so the subject's acting because the PL is active. The pual, kudash, he was sanctified. Okay, and then in the Hithpael, the subject, so these are all perfect forms. The Hithpael, the subject does the sanctifying activity to himself. So it's he sanctified himself. Okay, if it were feminine singular, she sanctified herself, and so forth. Okay, so that's the directly reflexive idea. Now, in the indirectly reflexive idea, the subject is performing the action, but the subject doesn't perform the action directly on himself. The subject performs the action for himself or herself. Okay? And a good example here is from the root palal. We can put the verb palal in the PL, and when we do, it will have this sense: he mediated. He mediated. And then we could put it in the Hithpael. 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 Here, it takes on the indirectly reflexive semantics. So he mediated for himself. Okay, so in the PL, he mediated for others. But here, he mediated for himself, which means when you seek mediation for yourself, what are you doing? It means he prayed. Okay, so he mediated for himself means he prayed. Now, the third sort of semantics that putting a verb in the Hithpael stem could do is to indicate the reciprocal idea. And so here in this situation, we have plural subjects perform the action on each other. Okay, so I'm not performing the action on myself as a single person, but rather two or more people are performing an activity and they're doing it to the other person, so in a reciprocal way. So they perform the action on each other or one another. So, example here. Take a verb like davar, the PL, perfect, dibru, so there's the PL, third common plural, it's just they spoke. Okay, they spoke. But put it in the Hithpael, and what have we got? We have hiddabaru. This is actually derived from hithdabaru. Remember, when I have a dental in root 1 position with that tav infix butting up against it, I can get full assimilation. The tav becomes a dalet, and then the two dalets are written once as a dalet with a dagesh forte. So hiddabaru is they spoke together. Right? They spoke to one another. They spoke together. They conversed. Okay? Each subject is speaking to the other person. So there you go. That's the reciprocal notion. And finally, another main way that putting a verb in the Hithpael stem can provide meaning here is through the iterative notion. That is to say, the action could be repeated. And that could be the semantics of using the Hithpael form. So action is done repeatedly. All right, so let's take a verb like halach. Halach. The cow of halach, he walked. Okay, it's a simple action. Put it in the Hithpael, and what do we have? Hithhalech. Hithhalech is he walked back and forth, or to and fro. He walked around. So there is the iterative idea. Okay. So there are other nuances to using the Hithpael stem. Again, you need to look at your verbs, look at your lexicon, and find out exactly what nuance a verb has when it's in the Hithpael stem. And that's really where you're going to learn these meanings.